I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. DeSantis, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Deputy Attorney General, when Sally Yates defied President Trump's travel restriction order at the end of January 2017, was that appropriate what she did?
I disagreed with her decision.
So if you're in a position where you get an order, your job is to follow the order. If you think it's unconstitutional, then your response would be to resign your office, correct?
Well, my response would be, I think, first to talk with the person who gave the order. But ultimately, if I concluded it were unconstitutional, I would not implement it.
And obviously, you can't have a department operating where each one's a law unto themselves, or if they happen to think something's bad, that they just don't follow the orders, correct?
That's exactly right.
So it bothered me then, one of the recent revelations, you have Andrew Weissman. Yeah, he's a big Democrat donor, which I agree doesn't disqualify you from being fair. He went to Hillary's supposed victory party. Doesn't mean that necessarily disqualifies you. But when she took that action, he sends her an email with his DOJ email account saying how he's in awe and so proud of her basically standing up to Trump. I mean, it was seen as a very direct rebuke to the president. So your test was, are the political opinions affecting how one conducts himself in office? I think that's a fair test. But isn't that example of that email an example of his strongly held anti-Trump opinions affecting how he's conducting himself on his official email?
As I mentioned, Congressman, I've discussed this general issue with Director Mueller on several occasions. He understands the importance of ensuring that there is no bias reflected in the conduct of the investigation.
It looks bad to the public. I'm just telling you that right now. Part of it is there an actual bias? But as you know, as someone very experienced, is there an appearance of that? And this appears that to be, because clearly what she did was not something that that experienced prosecutors would think was good. And obviously the Supreme Court has slapped it down. The Russia investigation, who started it? Who was the agent? Was it Strzok who started it? Who opened it, the case?
Congressman, that matter is under review by the Intelligence Committee, and there's nothing that I can talk about publicly regarding the initiation of the investigation, but I can assure you that we're going to provide appropriate access to the Intelligence Committee to what they need to answer.
Did the FBI pay for the dossier?
I'm not in position to answer that question, Congressman. But
you know the answer to the question?
That is, I believe I know the answer, but the Intelligence Committee is the appropriate committee to make that.
That is not true. We have oversight over your department and the FBI, and whether public funds were spent on a dossier, that is not something that's classified. We have every right to that information. You should provide it. If you're not, then there will probably be things. Was that info used to get surveillance over anybody associated with Trump?
I appreciate that question, Congressman, and I know that's been a concern for several members of the committee. I have set aside about a half hour every day to review FISA applications, and it is not legal for me to talk about those applications, so I'm not able to answer one way or the other.
Well, I'd like that authority. I think that you can say, and you may not be able to talk about the sources and message or the substance, but if this was used, we need to know that. Do you agree that so what was the role of Bruce Orr? He met with Christopher Steele before the election. Was that an authorized meeting?
Well, Congressman, I do not know all the details. This information is still developing, so I don't know the full story, but we've agreed to make Mr. Orr available for congressional interviews, and they'll be free to ask him those questions.
You need to pursue it. It's your department. You demoted him. He's working with Christopher Steele. You have an anti-Trump dossier funded by the Democratic Party. His wife works for Fusion GPS. This doesn't look good, so we need answers to those questions.
I'm not suggesting that I'm disinterested, Congressman, just that we've done everything we can to allow you to get those answers.
Let me ask you this. The role of Mr. Strzok, how much of this Russia investigation was due to him? Because, yes, Mueller saw the text. Obviously, I think there was nothing he could do. You get rid of him. But how much of this whole investigation has been infected with his bias? Have you made a determination on that?
I have not, but I do want you to know, and again, without talking specifically about this investigation, that the FBI does have procedures for all investigations to ensure that they're appropriately vetted, so there's any one individual would be able to make decisions on that.
I hope that, but if you look at that damning text on 15 August 2016, this is bad. He says, I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's Andrew McCabe's office, that there's no way he, meaning Donald Trump, gets elected. But I'm afraid we can't take that risk. We in the FBI can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. So let me ask you this. If you have those Walmart shopping Trump voters that Peter Strzok so derided in his text messages, how do they react to that? Do they have confidence in their FBI and their Department of Justice when you see that you can't let the American people vote somebody in who they want to?
Congressman, I think what I hope you can tell your constituents and to provide reassurance to the American people is that we have appropriate internal affairs officers who will get to the bottom of that. Our Inspector General is the one who exposed that, and he's going to deliver a report, and we're going to take...
When is that report due?
Gentleman's out of time.
I believe it's going to be relatively soon. I believe he's actually testifying coincidentally next door. He knows I want to complete it as quickly as possible, but consistent with his responsibilities to make sure he gets it right.
I thank the gentleman. Yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Raskin for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Rosenstein, welcome. It's good to see you again. I'm aware from having been a state senator in Maryland for a decade of your excellent service as U.S. Attorney there, and thank you for your service to your country now. My first question is about the Emoluments Clause, which you know forbids the collection of foreign government payments by the President of the United States and other public officials. More than 180 members of the U.S. Congress brought a lawsuit in the District of Columbia against the President's continuing collection of foreign government money for the Trump Hotel, the Trump Tower, Trump golf courses, and so on. The Department of Justice took the position that we don't have standing to raise that. If members of Congress whose permission is required under the Emoluments Clause do not have standing to raise the President's violation of the clause, how do we deal with the problem?
Congressman, that, as you mentioned, it's pending litigation. The Department has taken its position in court. It'll be the judge's determination whether or not that position prevails. I don't have anything to say beyond that. The court will make that decision.
Thank you. You said that Robert Mueller is a dedicated, respected, and heroic public servant whose distinguished military career and career as a prosecutor make him eminently qualified, perhaps singularly qualified, to be running the special counsel investigation right now. He's also a registered Republican, nominated as FBI director by President Bush, and unanimously confirmed by every Republican and Democrat in Congress. Is his judgment impaired, or are his decisions suspect because he's a registered Republican?
No.
Do criminal prosecutors and investigators have a right to contribute money to candidates for public office?
Yes.
And there are members of this committee who, as prosecutors at the federal or state level, gave thousands of dollars of contributions while they were prosecutors to candidates for office. Do you think that that would be the grounds for overturning verdicts that they received against criminal defendants?
No.
Okay. So I want to ask you this. On the eve of this hearing, we got a dump of hundreds of text messages that we've been spending most of the day talking about between Mr. Strzok and Ms. Page. And they no doubt make for fascinating reading. It's a little bit like Anna Karenina to go through them. And they are, of course, equal opportunity critics of public officials. They trash Bernie Sanders. They trash Senator O'Connell. They trash Martin O'Malley, the governor of our state. And, of course, they trash Donald Trump, who is repeatedly called an idiot. And at one point, I think Mr. Strzok says, watching the Republican debates, OMG, he's an idiot, which hardly qualifies him for any awards for originality or exceptional insight. You probably could have found that in millions of tweets across the country. But I was amazed to learn from Business Insider that the Department of Justice had invited a select group of reporters yesterday evening to DOJ to screen these emails, to look at these private emails. And I'm wondering whether you know of any precedent of the Department of Justice calling reporters, asking them to come in to look at part of an ongoing investigation outside of a press conference, or even if that's taken place during a press conference. I was amazed. Can you just explain that?
I'm accountable, Congressman, but as you know, I'm not the public affairs officer, so I wouldn't know what the precedent was. But generally speaking, our goal is to be as forthcoming with the media as we can when it's lawful and appropriate to do so. So I would not approve anybody disclosing things that weren't appropriate to disclose.
Do you know of any other cases where material in an ongoing investigation were released by the press officer to reporters?
I don't know the details, Congressman, but...
And are you aware of the IG rule, which says that material in an ongoing investigation cannot be released?
Yes, I appreciate that. No, when this inquiry came in from the Congress, we did consult with the Inspector General, and he determined that he had no objection to the release of the material. If he had, I can assure you I would not have authorized the release.
Okay. There's been much propagandistic talk today about fruit of the poisonous tree. And so, they're in a mad wild goose chase for a villain, and they found their villain in Mr. Strzok, who was promptly removed from the investigation by Mr. Mueller. But they're saying, well, there might be fruit from the poisonous tree here. And of course, fruit of the poisonous tree is a Fourth Amendment doctrine that relates to evidence that derives from an illegal search or seizure. Have you heard any allegation of Mr. Strzok or any other agent in this case having conducted an illegal search or seizure?
No.
Thank you very much for your testimony. You go back.